All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you I don't know, my name is Megan Nicholas. I'm the director of the Career Center. I go by the pronoun she, her, hers. We're really excited to have you with us this evening. For most of you, I believe it's this evening. Before we get started, I wanted to just make a couple of announcements. For those of you who are students, I wanted to let you know that there are two events coming up. One is the IEX Virtual Shadow Day, and IEX is a fintech company. So if you have an interest in law, finance, marketing, any of those areas, I'd encourage you to look into the Shadow Day. It will be Thursday, August 6th, and it will be remote. It will be another virtual session. And there is an application process, and those applications are due August 3rd. I'll be sending out to all of those who have registered in Handshake some more information about that. And then for those of you who are alum or students, we have another freelancing session tomorrow called Freelancing Nuts and Bolts of Launching During COVID-19. It's tomorrow from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And two of our alums, Megan and Cal, will be walking you through creating everything you need to feel confident in working with your first client. So this afternoon, or this evening, excuse me, I'd like to introduce you to our facilitator. He let me know that we have a lot to cover today. Chad Schoenwill graduated from CC. He is an alum of the class of 2003, and he's been working in ITS ever since. He started an esports program here at Colorado College in 2017, which I hope you all know about, as they've excelled in the esports arena, especially in this higher education field. I've also had the opportunity to know Chad personally, and he has been a fabulous colleague. I know him to be an excellent problem solver, but probably more importantly for today, he's also incredibly impatient, or incredibly patient. Oops, Chad, I just sold you out. Incredibly patient, and he's such a knowledgeable teacher around everything that is IT related. So we're very fortunate to have Chad with us today to really get a better understanding of Excel and how we can use it to accomplish our data goals. Just one housekeeping piece of information. If you are an alum and you haven't registered through Handshake, I will be typing the Career Center's email address in the Zoom group chat. And I'd encourage you to email us with your email address so that following this presentation, we can share the resources that Chad has created for all of you. We'll also be recording this session, so we can send that recording to you as well. So thank you so much. I know Chad's going to go over kind of how he's going to structure this evening. I would ask you to keep your mics on mute unless you are asking a question. So Chad, with that, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you for the kind introduction, Megan. We're gonna dive right in shortly, but just a couple quick things. First of all, we're gonna be spending most of our time looking at my shared screen as we go through Excel. So I'm not gonna necessarily see everybody or be seeing the chat. So if you do have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask. If it's something that'll derail us too much, I'll probably ask you to type it in chat and then it can be addressed later, but otherwise I'll just answer live. And the second thing is just about this class in general. And I posted a quick idea of how I'm expecting it to go. But this class is not really a follow along or a step-by-step kind of class because we would not be able to cover nearly as much that way. It's more of a showcase or a tour. So it'll go pretty fast. It'll be a bit like drinking from a fire hose. But I think the idea is to show you all kinds of various different ways that Excel might be useful. Some of it you may already know. Some of it doubtless you won't, but you could always refer back to it later and you could say, you know, that guy showed me that thing that one time, and then Google it and find out more of the how-to steps. So that's just, you know, overall to tell you about how it's going to go. So to start us off, before I do the screen sharing bit, I just wanted to talk about why you would want to use Microsoft Excel in the first place. Of course, it's a spreadsheet program, in my opinion, the best spreadsheet program, and in fact, the best Microsoft program, and because it's so flexible. But I'll pose it to the audience real quick. We'll just spend a couple minutes on it. Anyone want to throw out reasons you might want to use Excel? Nobody's got anything. Okay, well, there are so many reasons. One of them is to crunch numbers for you. A lot of us can do calculations on our own on a calculator or whatnot, but Excel is kind of a way to front load time. So you spend time developing a worksheet where all the calculations line up, and then later you just plug in the data and all the calculations happen instantly. So that's one reason. A really important one that we'll talk about multiple times is making large amounts of data actually meaningful to human beings. You know, we'll show when I go over pivot tables what a huge spreadsheet looks like and how it's just mind-numbing unless you use some of the tools to make it readable by humans. You can also use it to perform tasks for you. So a real good one from CC is sending out emails. You wouldn't think you could use Excel for that, but if you pull a list, for example, in Excel of all freshmen, you could do what's called a mail merge, where you pull those into Outlook and send one by one emails to each of the freshmen, and you could address them by name if you wanted. I don't know that we'll have time to demo mail merge, but maybe. And then, you know, there are even a few more. So I'll start actually showing you some concrete examples here. This first one is something that I made actually not too far out of college. I was trying to find a way to sort of make a budget or a budget tracking sheet for just our household. So I decided to take on the project. You can see I did a whole lot of experimenting with formatting to make it look nice. But at the end of the day, it's a way to track income, bills, expenses, etc. So what I used to do is I would sit down each month and I would fill out all the information. We could create a budget for each month, see what the actuals were and what the differences were. I had a ledger for my checkbook in there, which actually to this day, I still use the checkbook ledger. And one thing I'll point out here is that a lot of times we end up thinking things have to be a certain way. So when you're adding numbers down a column, that the sum has to be at the bottom. But here you can see an example of where the sum is right at the top. Because in this case, I wanted to see what my current balance is no matter where I was. So it's just an interesting use. I had a credit card tracker in there, and then I had a savings account tracker. And again, with formatting, I could do some interesting things with plugging in an interest rate and then saying, okay, well, how much is that monthly? How much is it annually? And you'll notice that I can't actually click. In fact, I think if I can put on a little spotlight so you can see where my mouse is. Yeah, that's better. But if I actually try and click on any of these cells, I can't. And that's something called cell protection. I can click on and I can put stuff in these entry cells, but I can't actually click on the formulas. So it's a good trick to use when you make an Excel sheet for somebody to use and you don't want them to muck it up. So that's one example. Another one is this is actually the form Colorado College used for several years for annual performance evaluations. So this is kind of an interesting use of Excel because, as you can see with just some formatting tricks, it doesn't look like a spreadsheet. But people could put in their comments from their supervisor and employer, and then they could fill out, you know, my goal is to learn to use Excel. And it'll auto number the goals for them. And really the reason this was done in Excel was this part. So we had this rating scale that the supervisors would fill out. So each competency had a value or a weighting to it. as to how important it was for that position. And then you were supposed to rate on a 0 to 3. So as you filled it out, it would calculate your weighted score for you, and then also calculate the overall score for you. And then it would pull those overall scores back into the summary, add them together to get the overall rating. And you can see what the formula looks like for the overall rating here, which is a little bit intimidating at first glance, but it's a good example of the kind of thing that Excel is good for. Because with some time and effort beforehand to develop this, all that math was already done for all the supervisors on campus. They didn't have to do any of it themselves. So that's kind of a strange one, but I just showed it because it's an example of how flexible Excel can be. There is another one I did. Let's see. This is a calculation assistance one. So this relates to when the faculty have a process where they apply for grants for research and development. And so they have to decide whether to apply for the 53.5 cents per mile or an overall cost, whichever is lower. So this lets them put in, okay, well, what's the cost of the airfare total and what's the number of miles? And then it tells them which one to submit, so they don't have to do that math by themselves. Similarly, the living allowances. So you can see here what the rules are for that. Basically, for the first 7 days, you get $125 a day. And then for the next 7 days, you get $100 per day, and so on. So if you think about calculating that out, what was happening is the faculty were submitting a whole bunch of errors in their math. So the Excel calculator does it for them, right? All you have to do is put in a number of days, and it just spits out immediately what your per diem is supposed to be. So again, if we look at the formula there, it's a little bit complex looking. It's saying, well, if it's 1 through 7, then you have to do this. And if it's, between 7 and 15, then you do this and add it, and so on and so forth. So it took me some time to figure out that formula. But once I had it, from then on, any faculty who used the calculator didn't actually have math errors in their submissions. The last example that I want to show is the master inventory of computers on campus. This is kind of old, but it's something I developed years ago for us to keep track of all the computers. So this is an interesting one that's probably the most like what you were picturing when you think about Excel. This is a pretty classic spreadsheet, right, where there's all kinds of information and then each row is its own record. So just some interesting examples here of how to use math is that one thing that's super relevant for us in IT is how old computers are. But tracking the age in a spreadsheet is tricky because you can't go in there. Are you going to go in there every week and update every single one of them? No. What you can do instead is you can actually add and subtract dates in Excel. So you'll notice that there's a birth date field, July 4th, 2012 here. So this age is actually a formula. It is literally today minus the birth date. And then formatted to show correctly the number of years. So that way, with a birth date known, this age column just automatically updates. And this is why the ages are so incredibly high, 13 and 7 and 12, because we don't actually use this spreadsheet anymore. But when I pulled it as a snapshot and an example, something like five or 6 years ago. And you'll also notice I did this little color column. So this is something called conditional formatting. which basically just means that you format something in Excel based on a condition. So here the idea was to see at a glance without even having to look at the numbers or any of the other info. You know, are we talking about a computer in the green and the yellow and the red, right? So a computer less than so many years old is in a green. So that was, you know, one of my attempts. As you can see, the kind of the common theme that I'm trying to do with all these is make large amounts of data more understandable, easily digestible to people. And that's really the crux of the value of Excel. And it's something that if you can get good at it by practice, will make you really valuable in any workplace. I don't care what it is. So let me pause there for just a sec. Any questions so far? And make sure we have nobody else waiting to come in. Okay. Very good. Then I will proceed. Oh, there we go. Why use Excel over a database like SQL? So the answer there is simply ease of use and accessibility, right? So if you understand SQL, then it's really better for a database than Excel is. However, if you're not versed in databases, Excel is much more accessible to you. It's part of the Office suite and the spreadsheet kind of format without having to have different tables linked together is simpler. That's what I would say. Microsoft also has a database program called Access, which I think it's kind of slowly phasing out because really the question is more Access versus SQL, and SQL blows Access out of the water. Also, databases are, you know, Excel, even though you can make it a database, it's really built to crunch numbers, whereas databases aren't as much. All right, so let's go back to it. All right, so for the next 10 minutes or so, I just want to show some basic kind of navigation stuff. So we're just going to start a new workbook. So in Excel, file is called a workbook. And then these little tabs at the bottom are called worksheets. So you can have multiple worksheets per workbook. Let me turn my spotlight back on there. Yeah. And you can do, you know, you can change the order of your worksheets just by clicking and dragging them. Create a new worksheets. Worksheets can refer to each other and often do. So a good example here on my master computer inventory is I have a summaries worksheet. So all these formulas are actually calculating based on a different worksheet. You can do that with different workbooks as well. You can have something reference a different workbook, but it's a little dangerous because you know, your files, your workbooks are saved in a certain folder on your computer. And if you ever move them, then it breaks all the references in Excel to those places. So it's doable, but it's better to try and keep things in one workbook amongst worksheets, in my opinion, if possible. Column and row widths. So let me show, here's another example of a table. So I can adjust the widths of the column just by pulling on the grab bar and manually adjusting. I can also, if I double click that, it will auto adjust to however wide it needs to be to accommodate the widest piece of data. And so sometimes you'll double click it and it'll go like this because one piece of data is really wide. So you can always readjust back again. You can also select all, which is this little funky triangle thing up in the corner. And then double click one of the column dividers and all of the columns will auto adjust. So that's usually a good kind of a first thing to do whenever you're opening a spreadsheet that looks like things are rumbled together, is just do a quick select all, double click one of the columns. Another quick thing to do that would help us with this particular spreadsheet is called freeze panes. And the idea there, let me move this toolbar. Okay. The idea behind freeze panes is simply that a lot of times as you're scrolling down through data, you lose the names of the actual columns, and it'd be nice to keep them. So if I go under freeze panes, I could say freeze top row as an example. So now as I scroll, the top row is always there. So this is, I mean, most spreadsheets should have that. So if they don't have it, it's easy enough to turn it on. I can unfreeze panes. I can also freeze the first column. And then it's the same thing as I scroll to the right, that voter ID number is always there. The way I like to use freeze panes though, because you'll notice the options are either row or column. The way I like to do it is if you select a cell and then you go to freeze panes and you just say freeze panes, it will freeze everything above that point and everything to the left of that point. So in this case, maybe we want both the row and first row and the column. Or if I unfreeze it again, maybe I go over one and I do freeze panes. So now the first row is frozen, but the first two columns are frozen. So that way it just gives you a little more fine control over what areas you're freezing. But anyway, freeze panes and the adjusting of the columns are two things that most all spreadsheets should have. It's similar with rows. You can manually adjust rows, or you can select all and double click. You can also, if you right click a column or a row, so if I do a column in this case, I can say column width and I can specify a number. So this is useful if you want to make all columns the same width. Then you can say, select all of them, go to column width and make them 10 or whatever it is. Same with rows. Let's see. So let's do a really basic macro. Go back to our new workbook here. So this is going to be like the simplest explanation of macros ever, but a macro is basically like a way to store multiple commands and then execute them all at once. So first of all, one thing that probably will happen if you try to do a macro later is you'll look around in all these menus in vain because you're trying to find macros. But Excel doesn't actually show you macros by default. You have to go into the Excel options, customize the ribbon, and you'll see here how there's the different tabs of the ribbons. And what we have to find is the developer tab over here. So, each of these, the home, the insert, the page layout, you see it corresponds up here to the ribbon titles, but the developer one is unchecked by default. So we have to first turn on the developer tab, then we'll find it up here, and that's where macros are. So just as a basic example of a macro, let's say that we want to always make our titles look a certain way. So we could go to developer and we could say record macro. We'll call it the title macro, and we'll give it a shortcut key. We'll make it Control T and just say the macro is really just for this one workbook. So now you'll notice where it says stop recording. At this point, everything that I do, it's going to record. So I'm going to come up to home and I'm just going to say, okay, I want this to be, let's go with Algerian font, and we'll make it a little larger, and we'll give it a purple background, and we'll make the text white, and we'll make it wider, something like that. So then at this point, I go back and I say stop recording macro. So at this point now I have a macro. So if I go into macros, you'll see it's listed there. And I can edit it, and this is what it looks like. It's just a visual basic, essentially. But if I'm going along and I say, you know, hey, this, and I have some text, you know, at this point I can apply that macro. So I can go to macros, title, and then say run. And it will apply all those same steps that I recorded. Or like I said, I actually assigned it a Control T shortcut. So if it's something you're really going to do a lot, you can assign it a shortcut like that. If you don't already know it, by the way, Control Z is your friend. Control Z is undo, and you can undo many steps backwards. That's pretty common amongst all Office programs, but it's particularly useful in Excel. And it can also kind of make you braver to try things out. Let's see, cell referencing is another good one to show. So every cell, it's kind of like a chessboard, right? So if you look up in the upper left, this cell right here is known by column C, row 11, so the cell name is C11. However, it doesn't have to be named that. So as an example, let's say, maybe I want to go to Aju Fen here, and I want to actually name this cell Aju. So I can literally just select it and name it Aju up here in the upper left. Now, why would I want to do that? I could actually refer to that as Aju in a formula. Although I probably wouldn't recommend that. It's better to use the normal designation. However, when I have named cells, they come up in the little drop-down list. So maybe I have a reason to frequently go to that point. I can name it and then just drop down and select it, and it takes me right to the Aju cell and selects it. Similar thing with a range. So let's say, for example, I want all of the geology department. So this here, I can just rename to geology. And then anytime I want, I can go select geology and go straight there. So usually you would use that for quickly navigating around, especially when you have a really large spreadsheet like this. Speaking of shortcut keys, there are a lot of useful ones in Excel. I've got a good list of them here. And after the class is over, to everybody who actually registered through Handshake, so that I have your name and email, I will send this file as well as all the other example files so that you have them to refer to. So rather than going over these shortcuts right now, I'll just point that out. I did kind of highlight ones that I think are especially useful. Just as a quick example, I'll show, you can select a whole column by selecting the header, but also anywhere you are in that column, you can just do Control Space, and it will select the whole column. Oops. That was a paste, not a space. Similarly, you can do Shift Space, and it'll select the whole row. Let's see, going back to our sheet here. Likewise, you can use the arrow keys. Whoops, I have scroll lock on. So to navigate around the cells. Tab also is going to the right. Shift tab is going to the left. Enter is going down, and Shift Enter is going up. So a lot of the times when you're in an Excel sheet, if you click around, so like if I'm doing a formula, for example, and I want to move, if I click a cell, it's going to assume that that's I'm wanting to add it as part of the formula. So instead, if I want to move, I can just use the keyboard shortcuts to move The last thing I'll show in this section is locking the cells. So you remember I referred to this in my budget worksheet, so that I can't even select the formulas. So that's real simple. It's in the review tab, and it's called protect or unprotect. So it's protected right now, so I can just say unprotect to turn that off, and then I can select those cells and I can mess them up. But of course I can just undo that as well. So if I wanted to turn that back on, I would just go to protect sheet. And here's all the different options that you can turn off and on. So in this case, I just had unchecked select locked cells and then said okay, and then they're locked. The way you lock a cell, so if you just right click and go to properties or format, you'll see there that under protection, it's either locked or not. So I can, just go down this whole column, for example. Go to protection and make sure that they're all locked, or unlock them, whatever the case may be. The locking does nothing at all until you tell it to protect the worksheet. You can also, you probably noticed, password protect that, so that if somebody finds this and goes unprotect, that they actually have to type a password. I wouldn't recommend that, because if you forget the password, you're screwed. There's no password recovery for an Excel worksheet. I find that most of the time, it's not really that somebody is being insidious and trying to mess with your data. It's more just you're protecting them from fat fingering. So just locking it without a password, I think, is plenty sufficient. All right, so far so good with schedule. Let me pop back out here and ask if there are any questions on that navigation. Not comprehensive, but just some tricks that hopefully you'll find useful. Oh, all right, well, I'm gonna take a drink because my voice is already getting scratchy. All right, time for math. Now, I only have a few minutes for this, where I could actually do like a whole day seminar on math in Excel. So we're going to make it real brief, but math is something that Excel excels at. So it's definitely something that I want to show. The first thing is the order of operations. So this is something that, at least for me, back in grade school, was explained to me as PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, which basically is parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And the idea there is the order in which you do those operations is important and can change the outcome of what you're looking for. So let me think of just a quick example of that. If you, let's just say that we're talking about CC education. So there's 4 blocks in the fall semester plus 4 blocks in spring semester times 4 years, right? So we'll put in a equals there to make the formula. So according to this, you would have 20 blocks during your 4 years at CC. Now, what do we all know? That's obviously incorrect, right? 8 blocks a year times 4 years is 32 blocks. So where did we go wrong? Well, it's the order of operations, right? So let me, I keep having to turn this back on because I pop out for the questions. But so what it's doing here is it's doing the multiplication first, because that's the first thing that happens in the order of operations. So it's saying 4 times 4 is 16, plus 4 is 20. So in order for it to do what we want, we're going to use parentheses instead, right? So we're going to say, okay, the fall semester plus the spring semester. Oops. Do that first, and then multiply that by 4. And now we'll get the answer that we expect, because parentheses comes before anything else. So I wanted to do just a very quick reminder of the order of operations, because if you ignore it, it will be to your peril and you'll get the wrong answers. It's always good, like in all math, to at least gut check and don't just trust Excel to do it right. But really the best way to make sure is to just overuse the hell out of parentheses. You can literally put parentheses on every expression, even when it's not necessary. And when there are multiple parentheses, it will always do the inner ones, left to right, inner, and then outer. So if you don't want to care about, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, just overuse parentheses. And that will help you a lot in making sure that you keep things accurate when it comes to math.
Chad, the question that was in the chat box is actually about the last section you went through, and it's probably a quick answer.
Okay.
The question was, if you send your Excel sheet to someone and they change things, can you unchange them?
No, unless you have some version of it like backed up. So like, let's say, for example, I emailed my Excel sheet to Megan. She opened it and she did 5 or 6 different things and saved it and sent it back to me. Like my undo function, for example, wouldn't work in that case. So I would be hosed. Now I would still have my original sent file, so I could go to my sent email and pull it off of that. But there's no way built into Excel to like roll back those versions. All right. So really quick on basic formulas. So you'll notice that if I just type in 4 plus 4, then Excel's like, okay, great, that's just text, right? I don't know any different. The way to make Excel understand, hey, Excel, I am going to type in a formula now, is equals. And you'll notice that the interface changes a little bit when I type equals, right? Like it grays out the formatting options. It gives me this little drop down where it has different things that it thinks I might want in terms of functions. But it's something that you'll get in this trap where you're like, why is it like doing this dotted line thing? Anytime that you hit equals, you're signaling to Excel, hey, I'm doing a formula now. You will get, there will be times where you type a fair amount of a formula and you forget the equals. And it's just one of those simple things that you got to keep in mind. First, you got to do equals. So let's see. Let's do like there's a good example. Let me just do, we're going to make a cookies sheet here. And we're going to say Monday, we'll go through, we'll do sales Monday through Sunday. And then we'll do like January. Just some quick examples. And we're just going to put some, whoops. Actually, here, we'll do equals random between and we'll say between 0 and 100. And just do this for random numbers. Okay, so let's just say these are my cookie sales, and I want to add them up. So in Excel, I could say, all right, I'll have to do my equals. And then I could start clicking. So I could say it equals this cell here plus this cell 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 plus that cell, and hit enter. And that's a perfectly viable way to do it. Now you'll notice, of course, that all the numbers change there because I sent them to be random. So every time the worksheet refreshes, it'll be random. But for the purposes of this, I just did it to have some quick numbers. We could also copy these and then turn around, and instead of just pasting, we'll click the little side options so that we get more paste options. And here I can paste specific things. So the way I usually like to do it is to say paste special. And by default, it'll paste everything. But in this case, I just want to paste the values. So now when I say OK, you'll notice that these are no longer the rand between, but they're just the values. Another good way to think about that while we're on the subject, I know it's kind of a side thing, but there's something called Format Painter, which is basically just copying and pasting a format. But this is super valuable both in Excel and Word and PowerPoint. You know, if I have a format here that I like, it's easy for me to just go up to Format Painter and click it, and then click, and it only paints the format. So I don't have to do all those steps again. I don't have to make a macro, etc. Anyway, just quick pasting tip. Okay, so that was a totally legit way of building that formula. The other way that I could do it is I could say equals sum. And so this function in Excel is saying, okay, a sum between what and hang on, my mouse froze. Okay. So I can just say, all right, I click and drag, I want you to sum this whole range, C2 through C8. So clicking and dragging works great. I could also literally just type that and then hit enter. So that works too and is a little easier than the 1 by 1 by 1. I can also do what's called AutoSum. So if I go into the formulas tab here, you'll notice that AutoSum is right there at the top. And I just literally click it and Excel guesses what I want, which is to add all these up. Or if I were to put it over here, I could do AutoSum and it'll guess I want to sum those. Most of the time it's right, not always. So those are a couple of different ways you can do it. But the real magic in Excel is something called the autofill tool. And that's this little tiny square in the bottom right corner. And you'll see that the cursor changes to like a black cross when it's over the autofill tool. So rather than having to do this for every single column, I could actually, let's just delete these. So I could start by auto summing my first column, and then I could literally just autofill that across. And it automatically applies the same formula, and you'll notice it changes the cell references as it goes. So that makes it super easy to drag this formula down the whole way. You can play around with autofill. You saw me use it when I was doing this. So instead of having to type every month, I can just autofill the months. You know, you can play with it. It'll recognize patterns, right? So if I do 1, 2, let's say, or let's just start with 1, it'll probably just autofill ones because it's thinking I just want to copy the text. But what if I say 1, 2? Let's see what happens. It recognizes more of a pattern there. What about A, B? Yeah, okay. How about A, B, C? So like I say, you can kind of fill it out and see, it still didn't find the pattern there. It's better at doing it with numbers than it is with letters, except for things like dates and stuff. Okay, and then real quick, a cross worksheet formula. So let's just say that I'm going to have a subtotal of all of my July, or of all my sales, period. So that's going to be this number, right? So anyway, let's just say, there, that's what I need it to be. But let's say we're going to just sum all of these, but we want to do it on a different worksheet, right? We'll call this the summary worksheet. Let's delete these columns. So I want to do an equals, and then I can literally just go to that sheet, or I can do my my sum equals sum, and then select from a different sheet what I'm trying to add up, right? Which is actually these. And then hit enter. So now the only difference is it's just saying, hey, it's on this sheet, and then the cell references. So it's really easy to do the, the formulas across different worksheets. The other thing I'll quickly point out is if you select any group of numbers in Excel, notice way down here at the bottom right that it already calculates the average, the count, and the sum for you, because those are things you'll often want to know. So if you want to know something at a glance, you don't even have to write a formula. You can just select those numbers and then take a quick look at it. All right, anyway, there's a lot more to math in Excel, but that's a basic introduction. So data, working with text and things like that, because that's what you'll often see, things that are exported into data, is the next part. So let me share screen again and turn on my spotlighter. All right, so the first thing to show is sorting and filtering data. So when you have a whole bunch of data like this, or maybe we can use our my pivot table example here. So if we want to sort this, right? So what's important about this data is that the rows always remain the same, but what order they're in doesn't really matter. So for example, you'll notice here we have voters in a district. Basically, this is a big table of voters. When they last voted, what party they're affiliated with, what precinct, etc. So let's suppose that what we want to do is sort this information. The best thing to do is always do a select all first when you're sorting. So we say sort, and then by which column. As long as you have headers, you'll notice where it says my data has headers up here. Otherwise, if I uncheck that, or if I don't have headers, you're just going to get columns, A, B, C, or whatever. So another reason why data headers are always good. The other reason is you'll notice that it gets selected if I uncheck that. So that means the data headers will also sort in with the data, which you don't want. So anyway, let's say we want to sort it by the party, and we'll do it A to Z. So then everything is sorted by this first. So the American independents come first, and then the declined, and so on. So sorting is something you often want to do by like alphabetical, right? So for example, let's say we want to sort by voter name. So we'll go in and we'll choose voter name instead, and we'll say A to Z. The other thing that you can do is add levels. So let's go back and we'll do a party vote, but this time we'll add a level. So after party, or within each section of party, then I want you to sort by voter name at that point. You'll notice not all the voters have names in the sheet, but those that do, it's sorted by name within that section. Now, granted, it's sorted by first name, because as you'll often find in Excel sheets, the voter name is just one cell. It's not first name and last name. So that's something that you'll encounter quite a bit, but there's a way around it. So let's suppose that we want to sort these by last name. and we currently can't. How are we going to fix that problem? So there's a couple different ways to do it. Probably the easiest way is called text to columns. So you'll notice that here in the data tab is where it says text to columns. And first we need to create a little space for it. So I'm just gonna create a couple of new columns. By the way, if you right click a column and say insert, it'll always insert to the left. And if you do a row, it'll always insert above. And if you select two columns, it'll insert two columns, just as an example. So I'll do that for a little bit of room to work with. And then I'm going to go ahead and select voter name here, and then text to columns. So it's saying, okay, it gives us a little wizard, and it's saying, all right, how are we going to want to determine which pieces we can separate out? And whenever you see this, 95% of the time or more, you're going to be selecting delimited. And that just means there's some kind of a character between each of the values. So usually it's a comma, or in this case, it's a space, right? Each name has that in common. It's a first name space, a last name. So I'll say it's delimited. Right now it's saying, here are your delimiters, and it auto selects tab. And then it kind of previews for me my results, which are not what I'm looking for. But if I go to space, then you can see, oh, that is what I'm looking for. Now we are splitting between first name and last name. So then I can say next and finish. And now, voila. So I could say voter first name, voter last name. And they're all split, just like that. So now I can go in and go to my sort and tell it, so sort by last name. Great, wonderful. I'll undo that. Another quick thing that I'll show that's kind of fun is there's a formula to actually capitalize the first letter of each name. So like in this case, they're all lowercase, right? But what I can say is I can just come to a new column and I can say, okay, this equals proper of this. And proper just means that the first character is capitalized. And then autofill, right? So you can do those kind of corrections. And what's cool is using the formulas like that, the data formulas, to split the columns or to proper them. You know, it doesn't matter if this is 50,000 records long, it's still done just like that. All right, so let's go back and delete that extra. You can also go the other way. So if we wanted to reconstruct that single column, we can use something called concatenate. Concatenate. Oh, I have to say equals first to say I'm doing a formula. So concatenate is a fancy way of saying you're adding text together. So let's say we're going to choose that function, and then we're going to follow it along here. So we want to concatenate this, comma, this. Okay. Great. So we've concatenated it, but there's a problem, right? We've added the text together, but there's no space anymore because we use that as our delimiter. So we're going to have to redo our formula a little bit. If we go up here to the top, so we're concatenating, you know, this cell and that cell. And all we have to do is just add another argument in between. So, you know, we're concatenating B2, comma, and then I'll put in a quotation, space, quotation, and then another comma. So here we're saying, take whatever's in B2, put a space in between it, and then put whatever's in C2. So now I'll get my space back, and then I can autofill. You can, you know, add anything that you want. You could add middle names, you know, that way, for example. The other thing, let's see, I was going to show you, oh yeah, so if we did the proper, it's good to show the reverse. So proper blah, blah, for our uppercase. If we wanted it to be lowercase, we could say equals lower. And it's the same thing in reverse. It lowercases it. You can also do a fairly simple just formula. So what I could do is I could just say equals B2 and then put an ampersand and say I want a space as well, and then another ampersand B2. So if you don't like the concatenate function, you can always just do it this way as well. Okay, so let's kind of go back, delete that, and talk a little bit about filtering real quick. So sorting is just putting the data in a certain order according to what you want to see. Filtering is actually hiding everything except what you want to see in the filter. So you can come in here and just toggle the filter on. Or if you ever open up an Excel sheet and you see these little arrows, that just means that somebody toggled on the filter. That's all that it means. So let's say I want to filter by party. So I can pull this down, and right now it's showing everything. So if I only wanted to show Democrats, then I could uncheck everything but a Democrat, as an example. Or easier is uncheck select all, and then just check the one that you want to show. So now it's only showing the Democrats. The other data is still there. It's just hidden. And you'll notice whenever the text is blue over here on your rows, that means that there's a filter in place. And you'll notice it goes from 1 to 613. Let's actually, if I clear this filter, let me sort by something else so that I can show this better. So I'll sort by, we'll just do precinct. And then I'll go back to my filter by party and unselect all and go to Democrat. So now you'll see that it jumps around more, right? Like there's between the different rows that it's showing. So at this point, like one thing that you could do if you wanted to just pull out all the Democrats from this table is you filter it by Democrat and then select all, just Control A to select all, or up here, select all. Copy it, make a new worksheet, paste it. So now in this worksheet, that really is all the data. But in this original one, it's still just filtered, and I can clear the filter. So that's a good way to quickly hone in on something and like slice it out to work with separately in another worksheet, is using that filter. Go ahead and delete that sheet. You can also do a find replace. This is something that can be really useful in a lot of Office applications. But if I hit Control F on my keyboard, I can type in a term and it'll find it. So let's say that I want to find Melanie, and then I can just say find next, and I keep saying find next, and it goes to each version of that. But there's also a replace tab. So for example, I could come in here and so I could do again Control F. And in this case, what I want to find Republican. So I can go there and I'm finding all of them. And I want to replace with Democrat. So now I can say replace, and you'll see that it replaces them. Or I can just say replace all. Okay, 1,188 replacements. And whoops, I didn't mean to do that, so I'll just undo it. But that can be useful in cases where, say, you're, a good example is you have all this documentation that refers to Mary Smith, the person working in the office, and then Mary leaves, and a different person is hired. So you can then just say find Mary Smith and replace with whatever the new name is, as an example. You do have to be a little careful with find and replace, because, you know, if you, let's say you search for something like MO, right? Well, MO is part of Democrat, so it will show up there. And if I replace it with OM, for example, then it completely wrecks my spelling. So in any case, just be a little careful with the find replace. Usually the best way to do it is to do the find next for each one and then replace, or at least a few of them, so you can make sure that you're not messing it up. All right, let's see. So let's look at real quick importing data. So let me go to my new Excel sheet here. And I have, like, just real quick in the break, I just exported a list of names and emails that are subscribed to a listserv so that I could import them into Excel. So if I go up to the data tab here, and really I can just go to file and open, to be honest. And I choose a data file. So let me look here at my desktop. Not Dropbox. And so I have this, where is it? Oh, I want, it's not actually an Excel file, so I need to tell it, let me just browse instead. So here it's looking for all Excel files, but what I'm importing is a CSV file, so it's not actually an Excel file. So what I'm going to do is just change this to all files, no matter what it is. So I could tell it to import an image, for example, but it's not really going to help me out. So let me see if I can find my quickly exported. What is it called? Let me take a quick look. It's called subscriber report. Okay. Yeah, so I want to open subscriber report CSV. So I'm going to get that familiar wizard again, where it shows me a little bit of the data that I've got and says, hey, do you want to import this as delimited or what? So as usual, I'm going to select delimited. And then because I had recently done space, that's what it has. But if we look down here at the data, you can see there's a column, comma between each one. So I'm just going to change that to comma and then say finish. And there, now I've imported that data into Excel from the comma separated file. And now I can do stuff with it, such as send a mail merge, if we get to that point later. But that's just a quick demo of importing data. So as we're wrapping up data, God, there's so many other things to show, but really quickly, I wanted to show you basic charts and graphs, and then pivot tables, since I did promise, I believe, that you could impress your friends with pivot tables. Okay, so here's just an example of a couple of charts. And generally what Excel expects is it expects there to be a title and then column headers and row headers. So if I were to just select this whole section here and then go to insert, I can do, you know, a specific kind of chart, or I can just start with recommended charts and it'll give me like a little preview of what they all look like. So I just pick the one I want and I say okay, and bam, I have a chart. So for the basics, charts are pretty easy as long as you have your data set up correctly. So let's move that over here, and maybe we'll do this, the second one, and do another chart. And in this case, I think a pie graph is probably what we're looking for, you know, what your tuition is spent on. So real simple for that. It's one of those things with Excel that is really easy, but if you don't have it quite right, it's hard to figure out what's wrong. But anyway, that's the basics of charts. Now, pivot tables are really, I think, more exciting than charts. And you can make charts based off of pivot tables. But there's a weird thing that happens with pivot tables where it, I don't know, for some reason it sounds like it's such an advanced arcane feature that, only the most wizened of Excel jockeys would understand. But in reality, it's actually very much simply making data like this readable to people. That's all that a pivot table is. And the best way to learn them is to just kind of play with them. So, if you got this, you were working, let's say, in a political office and you got this spreadsheet, how would you make it at all relevant to anybody? I would start with pivot tables. So if we go in and we go to insert, and we're going to just select everything, and we can insert a pivot table or a recommended pivot table. So let's just click pivot table. And we're going to, in this case, we're going to do a new worksheet and say, okay. So now it gives me, so I have my original voters data, and then I have the sheet 2. I'll just rename that pivot table. So it kind of has the data sort of loaded in here, and then it wants you to drag and drop them to be the columns and the rows and the values. You can also drag and drop them over here. So, let's just, for starters, we'll just play around, right? So let's just put voter ID in column. Yeah, that's fine. And party in row, and last voted in value. Okay, awesome. That does nothing for me. I don't like that one. Okay, so we'll just edit, or we'll just Control-Z our way out of that. All right, well, how about we say, let's put party in row again, because I kind of like that. And this time we'll put age group in the column, and then we'll put voter ID as values. Now, the values here look a little bit funky. Let's see. And it's because if we look down here, it's set to sum of voter ID. But really what we want is the count in this case. So now suddenly we have this, and with a pivot table, we said, oh, look, in this age group, for this party affiliation, this many people voted. Okay, now suddenly this is useful, much more useful than this, right? So basically it's a way to kind of take apart the building blocks of your data and put them together like with different Lego sets to get different meaning out of it. So let's try another one. So maybe we do years registered. Now it's quite a few, but that's okay. And then party, and then voter ID again. Not the sum, but the count. So, here we have, okay, great. So now we're seeing by how many years they've been registered and party, how many people voted. So like there's all kinds of different ways that we could slice this. So we could play with it for a while, right? And find what we're looking for, find meaning to it. And honestly, playing around with that data, we've just been doing it for what, 3.5 minutes. So you can do a lot of you can make a lot of meaning in a very short time with pivot tables. And you also, as you noticed, I avoided it, but there's a recommended pivot table. So here it kind of gives you different ones that it thinks might be useful. So you can always start with one of these. And then you can still go about and change it. Let's go back. And we can also, let's do one more quick example. So let's do age group by precinct. Oh, no, that kind of sucks. Let's do age group by party with the voter ID. And then we'll make precinct the filter. So now I can say, all right, in this precinct alone, oh wait, before I do that, I'd better change this back to count. It's really stubborn in trying to be sum. But I can say, all right, well, in this precinct here, what does it look like? In this precinct here, what does it look like? So it gives me a quick way to check that same data, but only filtered by a certain precinct. So the filter aspect of it is also a good one to play with. All right, 15 minutes left. I don't think, well, yeah, let me very quickly go into my subscriber report and just show you a mail merge. A mail merge is a way for Word, Excel, and Outlook to all work together. So I would have to have Outlook open to actually send a mail merge, but to build it, I'm not going to need that. So we'll just save this spreadsheet here to my desktop. We'll just call it mail merge so I can find it more easily. And then in Word, I'll just briefly demo. If I go to mailings, start mail merge, not labels, and I want to do emails. So I'm going to select recipients where I refer to my Excel sheet as the list. So it was on my desktop, called mail merge. La-di-da. Yeah, that was a bad example. Because it was still a CSV, I hadn't actually converted it. So instead of the mail merge list, I'm just going to use my pivot tables. Yeah, there we go. We'll use the voters tab. So now I'm merged with that Excel sheet in the background, and I can do things like insert fields here. So I could say, dear, and then insert voter first name. Blah, 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 blah. And then if I preview the results here, you'll see that it automatically puts in the values. Now, granted, like I said, not every voter has a name in that spreadsheet, but if they did, you would see their names coming up on there. And then I could say finish and merge, send email messages. And if I had their email addresses in here, I would select, to email with a subject. And then once I hit OK, Outlook would just start sending those emails rapid fire. You can actually sit there with your sent items open and just watch them go right down the line. So anyway, it's a very quick way, relatively speaking, to send mass emails in a way that doesn't feel like mass emails, because each one is an individual email to each person, addressed to each person. I'm sure all of you have received a mail merge before, even if you haven't sent one. Okay, so if statements I have is the last 15 minutes here. And I want to point out if statements because this is where things start to get really interesting, right, in formulas. It almost is similar to coding or programming with what you can do with if statements. So instead of just the basic sum, adding things up or whatever, if statements let you do something like this. So this is like a grade book, right? Where the formula results here are actually just dependent on what I put in. So as the teacher, I can just come in and I can put, the different scores in here, and it will automatically color code and say whether it passes or fails and give it a grade. So it's a, it's a good example of a useful way to use Excel. So, a 7 is an F or a fail, but if I go up to a 32, it's pass with an A. So how do you account for all the different permutations? You use if statements. So if we take a look at the pass-fail column here, you'll notice that, and the way an if statement works is you say if, and then you present an argument. So you're saying if this argument is true, right? If C4 divided by B4 is greater than or equal to 70%, 0.7, comma, then do what? So in this case, we're saying if that's the case, because at CC, at least when I was going to CC, it was A, B, C, or F. There was no D. So if you're getting 70% or better, you pass. And then value if false is fail. Right? So that's the basic building of the if statement here. If this is true, then do this. If it's false, then do that. So that's great for pass-fail, which is a binary. You either do one or the other. But for letter grades, it's more complicated than that. So this is what is referred to as a nested if statement. And it's real simple, again, even though it looks complicated as hell. And it's another way that you can impress your friends. But so here's what we're saying, right? If the score is greater than or equal to 90%, then it's an A. Otherwise, if it's not greater than equal to 90%, then another if statement. Okay, well then if it's greater than or equal to 80%, then it's a B. And if it's not, then another if statement. If it's greater than or equal to 70%, then it's a C. And then if not, then another if statement. If it's less than 0.7, then you could say F. And actually, this last one is unnecessary because the rest of the cases are F. So we could literally just say F here. We don't even need to specify. If not, then F. So anyway, a couple other examples of that I was showing earlier. The calculation assistance, right, where we were saying, okay, so if it's less than 17, if the number of days is less than 7, then this equals the number of days times $125. Otherwise, if it's between 7 and 15, then it equals 875, so, and so on and so forth. So it takes a little while sometimes to figure out exactly how to do this whole path. But once you get it, it's done. It's great. And you can make Excel do a lot of really interesting things that way. You can also, I showed you, or I talked about conditional formatting. So you'll notice that in addition to the values here, there are also colors. Now, conditional formatting, if we go, if we're just in the Home tab and we go to conditional formatting, you'll have different rules that are just kind of basic, right? So you can say, like, if we do this column, I want to highlight cells that are greater than, whatever, let's just say, and it will preview it for you, 150. So, you can see what it does right there. And you can change here, I want it to be green, whatever, and then say okay. So you can just do a conditional formatting rule that way. Or, like in this case, what I've done is, if we highlight this column and go to conditional formatting and manage rules, I've created custom rules that are basically kind of like a nested if statement again. So I'm just saying, hey, once again, if the result is less than a 70%, then make the text red. If it's less than 80%, make it yellow. And if it's greater than 80%, make it green. The one thing that you have to be careful of in both nested if statements and conditional formatting is that you have to do it in the right order. So, just as an example here, since I've already, if I start with the condition of less than 70%, and I do my check whether that's true or false, then everything that is true there is kind of off the table for the next set. So you have to just think through that when you're building the order of them. And basically it just means you either start at the higher end or you start at the lower end and go sequentially. And just be careful with your less thans or less thans and equal to. All right, so 5 minutes left. Let's stop there and see if there's any questions from anybody. I know that was like really fast, but again, I was just trying to expose you to multiple different things that you can do in Excel that are based on real world examples that I've used before to at least make sure you're aware of those options and can look further into the nuts and bolts of how to do them. And also a reminder that if you're registered through Handshake, you'll get an email and I'll attach all these example workbooks for you. And that way you can kind of look back and be like, hey, how did he do if statements? And you can actually look at the if statement in there. Or you can use that big table of voters if you want to practice pivot tables, for example. So yeah, I'll take a look at chat. Doesn't look like there's anything, but anything else, question or anything anyone would like to add? Yeah, there we go. There's your reminder to register.
Yourself. If you would like to ask a question, you can just ask it directly. You don't have to put it in the chat box.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, also be sure to let the Career Center know if you have any feedback about this session. It'll be both great for them and for me. And you can say whatever, both negative or positive, to help improve the session or what you would have liked to see in the session. Any of that is great for future classes. And with that, I'll say thanks very much and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Chad. We really appreciate it. I'm giving you a round of applause for everyone who is on this session. And yes, please let us know feedback on not only the session, but if there are other things that you would like to see or like to learn. And you can do so at careercenter@coloradocollege.edu. And I'll be emailing out all of these resources that Chad is providing for you through both the Handshake registration as well as those who email us at careercenter@coloradocollege.edu. Thank you so much. As Chad said, have a wonderful evening and thank you for joining us.